Hey everybody. There is no gender war. However, there is a war on traditional heterosexual masculinity. And it's a war that's been raging since second wave feminism took control of Western society in the 1960s. How do I know this? It's because in the 1990s, my children and I were casualties of that war. You see, American family courts are on the front line of that war. And even back then, they chose to protect a known child predator and an abusive mother over protecting that mother's children and keeping them in the home of their father. It took me over 5 years to prove this and eventually to get the courts to protect my children. Interestingly, when I finally won, it was a male judge who ruled in my favor, who was demonstratively not a feminist. But they're not the only frontline soldiers in the war against healthy masculinity. Look at the immigration debate. Remember just a few short months ago, the left was virtue signaling about how Trump was unethically separating families at the border? Notice how Trump's critics on this issue ignored the fact that Obama did this also. What's the difference? Well, it's pretty easy. Obama and male feminists like him are on the plantation. They follow the false narrative like the broken, trained, loyal dogs they are. The other interesting thing about this debate is that while Trump's critics attacked him for family separation at the border, they themselves continue to promote family separation of American families through divorce laws and family court discrimination against men on a daily basis all over the country. The hypocrisy on this is both stark and indefensible. Even Trump's opponents' attacks against American Christians are motivated by their opposition to healthy American families led by healthy, masculine, heterosexual men. That by itself should demonstrate how much the left opposes American family values and healthy heterosexual masculinity. They prioritize federal criminal foreigner families over law-abiding American families. But it doesn't stop there. Remember the 2016 election? The mainstream media promoted Hillary over Trump with everything they had. Hillary was so unpopular, she couldn't even fill a high school gymnasium. But somehow, she was promoted as a credible opponent to Trump. Then, after the 2016 election ended, it was discovered that there were at least 100,000 confirmed cases of voter fraud all over the country, with the majority of those votes going to Hillary and other left-wing candidates. And even worse, we're still uncovering more evidence of this every day. Even Project Veritas documented on video how the left manufactures votes and how left-wing politicians lie to their constituents on important issues to secure their elections. The simple solution to this is voter ID, but left-wing advocates bend over backwards in opposition to this credible and easily implemented effort to defend Americans' constitutional right to vote. And women who oppose feminism and support American family values and healthy heterosexual masculinity, they aren't immune to these attacks either. They don't get a pussy pass. Take the case of Marsha Blackburn. Her campaign ads were censored on Twitter and other social media outlets on ideological grounds, even though censoring electoral communications during a federal election clearly violates federal election laws. Look at the Antifa attack on Tucker Carlson's home. Tucker wasn't even present, and Antifa terrorized his wife and children because of Tucker's disagreement with their bigotry and criminal conduct. Or what about all the attacks on Trump's wife? The media and celebrities gave her harassment and defamation a full court press. All over the country, federal criminal foreigners are kidnapping, trafficking, assaulting, and killing American women and girls. But the left downplays or outright ignores this crime wave sweeping across our nation. And feminist organizations remain conspicuously silent. There is no Women's March to advocate on behalf of the women and children victimized by federal criminal foreigners. So much for protecting and promoting the rights of women, huh? This is just another indefensible hypocrisy that doesn't even pass the straight-face test. Just a few weeks ago, a study was released that proves American men face more discrimination than American women in the United States. And the mainstream media remained silent, as did almost everyone else. Since the Me Too movement started, how many successful American men have been targeted by false accusers and had their lives and careers destroyed with nationwide campaigns of provable lies and defamation? Look at the Kavanaugh hearings. Just like Roy Moore, he was subjected to highly publicized false accusations that were not only never proven, but the accusers in both cases refused to even file police reports. In Judge Moore's case, these false accusations led to him losing an election, and Kavanaugh is still demonized. Yet his accuser, who recanted, Blasey Ford, was nominated for an award because of her false allegation. Never mind the fact that she has a long history of being a bigoted left-wing activist. It's as bad as Mattress Girl, the false accuser who falsely accused a man of abuse, and after it was proven to be a lie, the National Organization of Women gave her an award for courage, for lying. Think about that, and take all the time you need. Because these are assaults against men and healthy heterosexual masculinity on a systemic scale nationwide. Today, Trump is being treated like a father in family court. You see, the family court witch hunting method is this: keep the false accusations coming until someone believes one of the lies. In reality, this is terrorism. And the method is simple. Every time a false accusation is debunked, bring another one to the table until the man is so beaten down and out of money that he can no longer defend himself. Then accuse him of being unstable and destroy him. But the family court witch hunting method has not only been adopted in politics, but today we see it everywhere. Demonstratively false accusations exist. Even conservatives and centrists use it now. This is the exact same campaign being waged against Trump and masculine men across the country. False accusation after false accusation, nonstop. To my mind, accusations devoid of evidence should be ignored, and the accusers should be severely punished for their lying. The parable of the boy who cried wolf comes to mind here. But it doesn't stop there. The left is so desperate, they're attempting to destroy masculine men before they even become men, often even before they reach puberty. Take the case of the young boy Desmond. This child, in violation of state and possibly federal laws, was allowed to cross-dress and perform in a 21 and over bar in New York. He was under 13 years old at the time. Yet no one, and I mean no one, called out this demonstratively illegal, unhealthy, and unethical grooming behavior, even though many family court professionals, law enforcement professionals, and mental health professionals have long known that grooming children is the first step to victimizing them, and it almost always leads to child victimization. Let's not even get into the fact that children across the country, whose state and federal law says they're not old enough to consent to intercourse, they're not old enough to vote, they're not old enough to drive a car, they're not old enough to make medical decisions for themselves, they're not old enough to purchase cigarettes or alcohol, but somehow they're old enough and apparently possess the medical and psychological acumen to determine what gender they are, even though long-settled biological and genetic theory conclusively proves that this is science denial. Yet even when the children's parents step in as responsible parents to stop this, they're opposed by the child's school and the courts, even though the United States Supreme Court in Troxel v. Granville clearly states that parents have a 14th Amendment constitutional right to parent their children free from interference. Now we're finding out that most of the time, it was never the child's idea to identify as the opposite gender in the first place. They were indoctrinated by school officials, court advocates, and transgender adults as part of a massive nationwide campaign to pressure them to abandon their heterosexual masculinity in favor of science denial. All is a part of the war on healthy masculine heterosexual American men. And now, even transgender adults of conscience are coming out of the woodwork and speaking out in opposition to trans indoctrination as not only a flawed ideology, but outlining in great detail how it is irreparably physically and mentally destructive to men. And let's not even start with the mental gymnastics needed to adopt the science denial of non-binary, third gender, or the mentally unstable people who identify as animals, as a different age, or even as a different race. Like Elizabeth Warren, the trans Native American woman who provably lied about her race on every job and professional organization application throughout her entire career. If she were a man, this fraud would be grounds for her to lose her law license, her tenure as a professor, and destroy her career in disgrace. Yet, in feminist America, this confirmed career fraud is running for president of the United States. And even though she provably lied about her race, she still has allies in the media and in minority organizations. The same minorities who boycott and harass anyone who culturally appropriates their race for financial gain. Yet, these groups are also conspicuously silent when it comes to criticizing confirmed bigotry from the left. Well, why is this? It's simple. Elizabeth Warren is not a man. Now, let's talk about President Trump, a successful billionaire businessman who refuses to collect a salary for being the president of the United States. In fact, when the left previously obtained his taxes, they discovered that he pays more taxes than almost anyone in his net worth category. And let's compare him to Astroturf Ocasio Cortez, the freshman congresswoman from New York. But before we dig into the hypocrisy that is Astroturf Ocasio Cortez, we need to talk about discrimination, because it's illegal in the United States. Astroturf Ocasio Cortez supports confirmed anti-Semites and complained when she got elected that she couldn't afford an apartment. Yet, she calls herself a socialist. If she were a true socialist, she would do what Trump does, donate her paycheck. But her socialism is just virtue signaling to pretend she has the moral high ground. Now, why do I call her Astroturf Ocasio Cortez? It's because everything around her is a fraud. She claims she grew up middle class, but it was confirmed she grew up in a rich neighborhood. I'm told she has a degree, but worked as a bartender. While I can't confirm it, it's probably because her degree is in something like gender and racial bigotry, or comparative rectal expansion exercise, or socialist economic suicide, or socialist science denial studies. Either that, or some other non-economically feasible or provably pseudoscience field of study. Further, in the greater scheme of things, Astroturf Ocasio Cortez, she's a nobody with zero achievements to her name on the national stage, outside of getting elected to Congress, possibly through illegal voter fraud. Though, I got to admit, she might have a whole warehouse full of participation trophies. I don't know. Yet, she's already being promoted all across social media, as though she's popular. How much do you want to bet that many of her social media followers are bots or sock puppets from Hillary propaganda groups like Correct the Record? How much do you want to bet that the social media tech giants are actively promoting her brand of socialist cancer artificially to make her seem more popular than she is? Again, she's a bartender with zero achievement on the national stage. Yet, people act like she's an overnight sensation. If this were the case, she wouldn't already have a documentary. One, I might add, that just sold to the Obama-linked Netflix for $10 million. So that begs the question, how does a bartender with zero achievements other than a questionable election get a documentary, let alone one that sells for $10 million, if she were not a manufactured product? What I mean is this. Astroturf Ocasio Cortez is the perfect example of how the left is artificially pushing their pre-chosen candidates today, much like how the music industry used to push manufactured boy bands in the 80s and the 90s. It's all lies. It's all AstroTurf. We even saw this in the 2016 election. Hillary was running the DNC. It was even confirmed she even bribed them for control. and then rigged the DNC primary in her favor. They even admitted to this in court after the DNC was sued for this fraud. Amusingly, the DNC, even in 2016, they knew this fraud was going to receive pushback. So at the convention, guess what they did? They brought in extra security and they erected border fences around the event to keep out the massive amount of Democrats who protested this fraud in order to make it appear Hillary's primary win was legitimate. Yet, even though they had a border fence around the 2016 DNC convention, they now oppose a border wall that protects their own constituents, the American people. This is so hypocritical that it doesn't pass the straight-face test here as well. Yet, after all these facts, feminists with a straight face claim that there is no war on men. Yet, recently, Gillette put out a man-shaming ad disparaging their primary customer base, men. The fact that Gillette was able to so openly discriminate against men in a country that has well-documented discrimination laws without any pushback from the mainstream media also confirms the war on men. Then, let's take Nancy Pelosi's attempts to stop Trump's State of the Union address. To my knowledge, nobody but me talked about how Trump has the constitutional authority to call a joint session of Congress without getting their permission first. Or how Pelosi's efforts to deny the president's State of the Union address violate her oath of office, especially when she provably lied about her reasoning to both Trump and the American people. Every mainstream pundit and personality ignored her provable lie while cheering her demonstratively unconstitutional and unethical childish behavior. Yet, after all of these provable facts and witnessing this observable reality, there are still men in the United States who ignorantly believe there is no war on men. And these ignorant men shame anyone who attempts to educate them. And then we have those in the manosphere who mistakenly believe that men should wage a gender war on women. This is also misguided. But in order to explain why, I got to go back to the beginning of this video and my personal story. You see, after I told the world about my 5-year fight to protect my children from their abuser, I received a lot of backlash from virtue signaling cosplay masculine men who stated that they would just kill the perpetrator, and they branded me as a coward for not doing so. These men, to use the term loosely, are so brave when they sit behind the safety of their keyboard in the comments section, often posting as sock puppets because they're too much of a bitch to even post on their main accounts, let alone say these things to me directly. This is just one more example of how masculinity is under attack. Sock puppet manginas astroturf in comment sections, hoping to reframe the verifiable truth as a false narrative. But I digress. Here's the problem with those who virtue signal unnecessary violence. Let's armchair quarterback this and take it to its logical conclusions. If I had done that and killed the perpetrator, the police would have either killed me or captured and jailed me. And even if I avoided capture and lived my life as a fugitive, I still wouldn't be able to parent my children as their father, which was my entire goal in the first place, to be an active father in my children's life. But even worse, left-wing bigots would have spun my violence as domestic violence in order to cover up the truth. And the entire multi-billion-dollar feminist machine across the United States would have promoted this false narrative, and no one would ever know the truth. Further, as a fugitive or a convicted murderer, I would have no credibility or any voice to help other men going through the same sort of persecution I was subjected to. The only reason I won is because I refused to compromise my ethics and I stood against the storm, which is exactly what masculine men of conscience should do in opposition to the war on men being waged all over Western society. What is needed is men and women speaking together in opposition to the war on healthy masculinity, calling out false narratives such as Astroturf Ocasio Cortez and the other indefensible hypocrisies summarized earlier in this video. Because today, thanks to left-wing bigotry and its assault on masculinity, the social contract between men and women is both dead and buried, And those who continue to advocate for the same failed social justice ideologies that destroyed the social contract in the first place, they won't make things any better. They'll make them worse. I'm DDJ, and this is your dose of misandry today.